I used to believe that if you loved a child hard enough, long enough, they would grow up knowing exactly where they came from. I was wrong. When my daughter, Clara was born, I was 20, 6 years old, exhausted, terrified, and wildly hopeful. Her father kissed her forehead once in the hospital and disappeared from our lives 5 years later with nothing but a suitcase and excuses. I remember standing in the doorway that night, holding Clara on my hip while she asked why Daddy wasn't coming back. I told her the lie all parents tell. He loves you. He just got lost. The truth was simpler. He chose himself. So I chose her. I worked mornings at a small accounting firm and nights cleaning offices downtown. I learned how to stretch soup for 3 days and how to smile when teachers asked why Clara's field trip check bounced. Every sacrifice felt temporary because I believed in a future where she would look back and understand. She was bright, sharp, ambitious, and somewhere along the way, ambition turned into judgment. When my business finally succeeded, when the little side consulting work became contracts, then companies, then numbers I never imagined seeing, Clara was already in college. She loved the results of my success, but not the road that led there. She stopped asking questions about my life. She stopped introducing me as my mom, and started saying this is my mother, like a technicality. When I wore the same pearl earrings to her graduation that I'd worn for 20 years, she leaned close and whispered, "Mom, you don't have to look so old-fashioned." I laughed it off. That was my mistake. As the money grew, so did the distance. Clara moved into luxury apartments I paid for, dated men who spoke about legacy and status, and corrected my grammar at dinner parties hosted in houses my money bought but where my presence felt tolerated, not welcomed. The worst part wasn't her criticism, it was her embarrassment. She didn't like that I talked about struggle. She didn't like that I donated quietly instead of publicly. She didn't like that I reminded her who we were before the money. By the time I remarried, a gentle, kind man who loved me without conditions, Clara had already decided I was an inconvenience to her image. She didn't attend the wedding. She sent flowers instead, with a note that said, "Congratulations. I hope this makes you happy. No signature." Still, I defended her to everyone. She's busy. She's independent. She doesn't mean it. A mother can turn excuses into art. The moment that broke me didn't come during a fight or a dramatic argument. It came quietly, cruelly, by accident. I was walking past the guest room when I heard her voice on the phone. She was visiting, staying under my roof, wearing clothes bought with my money. She was laughing. "Please," she said, "don't expect a penny of Mom's 56 million. I'm the only heir." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just certainty. I stood there, unseen, holding a tray of tea that suddenly felt very heavy. In that moment, I realized she wasn't waiting for my death out of hatred. She was waiting out of entitlement. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry until later. That night, I sat alone and finally allowed myself to ask the question I had avoided for years. When did loving my daughter turn into enabling her to forget me? And more importantly, what does a mother owe a child who has already written her off? That was the night everything began to change. The room was too quiet. That was the first thing everyone noticed. The mahogany table gleamed under soft lighting, polished so perfectly it reflected the stiff faces gathered around it. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years sat shoulder to shoulder, dressed in practiced grief black coats, solemn expressions, eyes that wandered far too often toward the leather folder resting in front of the lawyer. Clara arrived last. She entered with the confidence of someone who believed the ending was already written. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she took the seat closest to the lawyer, chin lifted, back straight. She didn't look around for comfort. She didn't look at the empty chair where I should have been. She looked calm. Almost bored, Thomas Hale, my attorney for over 2 decades, cleared his throat. He had known me through my worst years and my best ones. He knew my silences, he knew my patience, and he knew, better than anyone else in that room, that I never did anything without meaning. "Thank you all for coming," he said evenly. "We are here to read the last will and testament of—" He said my name. Clara didn't flinch. She adjusted her bracelet instead. The lawyer began with formalities, property descriptions, dates, legal phrasing. Clara's foot tapped lightly against the floor, the way it used to when she was waiting for a test result she already expected to ace. Then Thomas paused. He looked up. "To my daughter, Clara?" He read, "I leave my forgiveness for the distance between us, and my hope that one day she understands the weight of love she took for granted." Clara frowned. "That's it?" she asked, a sharp edge creeping into her voice. "Is this a joke?" Thomas did not respond. He turned the page. "I leave no monetary inheritance to my daughter." The air shifted. A gasp escaped someone at the far end of the table. Clara's color drained so fast it was almost frightening. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "That's not possible," she said finally, standing halfway from her chair. "There has to be a mistake. I'm her only child." Thomas met her eyes, calm and unmovable. "There is no mistake," he replied. "Please sit down." Her hands began to shake as she lowered herself back into the chair. The lawyer continued. "All financial assets, totaling $56 million, have been placed into a living trust established prior to my passing." Clara's breathing grew shallow. "And the trustee," Thomas said slowly, "is—" He said my name again. This time it wasn't as the deceased. It was as the controller. Clara's eyes widened. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around the room as if waiting for someone to laugh, to explain, to fix this moment. "No," she whispered. "She wouldn't do that." Thomas turned another page. "She did." He said softly. He began reading my letters, pages written over years, words I had never said aloud, moments I had swallowed for the sake of peace. Clara sank back into her chair as the truth unfolded, not in accusations, not in anger, but in clarity. For the first time in her life she was listening, and for the first time she realized she had never truly heard me at all. The confident heir who walked into that room was gone. In her place sat a daughter facing something she could not buy, argue, or charm her way out of. The consequences of turning away. The letters were not dramatic. They were not written to wound or accuse. That was never my way. Each page Thomas read was calm, deliberate, and devastating in its honesty, because truth, when delivered without anger, leaves no place to hide. The first letter was dated 12 years earlier. Clara shifted in her seat as Thomas read my handwriting aloud, steady and familiar. Asterisk, "Today my daughter canceled our dinner for the third time this month. She said she was busy. I believe her, but I also recognize the pattern. Love doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades quietly when it is no longer needed." Asterisk, Clara swallowed hard. She remembered those dinners, the last-minute texts. The excuses that felt harmless because there was always next time. The next letter went further back. Asterisk, Clara asked me not to mention how I built the company during her boyfriend's family dinner. She said my story made people uncomfortable. I smiled and agreed. That night, I realized my past had become something she wanted erased. Asterisk, a murmur moved through the room. Clara's fingers curled into her palms. She hadn't thought of it as erasing me. She had thought of it as protecting her image. Thomas turned another page. This one was different. He hesitated before reading. Asterisk, I overheard my daughter today. She laughed while speaking about my death, as if it were an inconvenience scheduled for later. She spoke of my money as if it already belonged to her. This is the moment I finally understood. I raised her to be strong, but I failed to teach her gratitude. Asterisk, Clara's head snapped up. Her lips trembled. That phone call, she had forgotten it, dismissed it as harmless talk. Hearing it echoed back through my words, stripped it of every excuse she had wrapped around it. She looked around the room now, not with confidence, but with fear, the fear of being seen clearly. Then came the documents. Thomas laid them out one by one. Records of financial requests Clara had made through intermediaries. attempts to access funds early, subtle pressures disguised as concern. Asterisk, mother, you should simplify things while you're still healthy. Asterisk, asterisk, it would be easier if everything were already settled. Asterisk, my words followed. Asterisk, I am not afraid of death. I am afraid of being reduced to a number before I am gone. Asterisk, Clara's shoulders collapsed inward. For years she had told herself a story where she was practical, efficient, prepared. She had never considered how cold it sounded to the woman who gave her everything. The final letter was the longest. Asterisk, I do not leave my wealth to punish my daughter. I leave it elsewhere to protect her from becoming someone who believes love is something inherited instead of earned. Asterisk, the trust was explained in detail: education for children of single parents, scholarships for girls who had been underestimated, support for mothers who were doing it alone. Everything I had once been, everything Clara had outgrown. Tears finally slid down her face, silent and unstoppable, not because of the money, because for the first time she understood that the inheritance she had assumed was never really hers. It had always been borrowed, and now the truth she had buried for years was standing in front of her, asking a question she could no longer avoid. Asterisk, if love was never guaranteed, why had she treated it like it was? Asterisk, the meeting ended without shouting. There was no dramatic collapse, no raised voices, no accusations hurled across the table. The lawyer closed the folder gently, as if sealing something sacred, and the room slowly emptied. One by one, people avoided Clara's eyes as they passed her. Pity is quieter than judgment, but far heavier. She remained seated long after everyone else had left. For the first time in her life, there was nothing to argue against, no loophole, no negotiation, no amount of charm that could undo a truth spoken too clearly. That was my revenge, not humiliation, not anger, not cruelty, clarity. In the weeks that followed, Clara tried to understand who she was without the safety net she had always assumed would catch her. The lifestyle she wore so effortlessly began to slip. Invitations dried up. Friends who admired her proximity to wealth lost interest when that proximity disappeared. She told herself she was still the same person, but she wasn't, and neither was the world around her. Meanwhile, something extraordinary happened. Letters began arriving at the foundation bearing my name, handwritten notes from single mothers who used the scholarships to return to school, from children who no longer feared being left behind because someone they would never meet had believed in them. I had not taken money away from my daughter. I had given it purpose. Clara visited the foundation once. She stood quietly at the edge of a classroom, watching a young woman help her child with homework before heading to a night class. There was something familiar in that, seen something she had not seen clearly when it was her own life. No one recognized her, and for the first time that didn't feel like an insult. It felt like truth. She never asked for the money back. She never challenged the will. Instead, she wrote me a letter, one that arrived too late to be answered, but not too late to be meaningful. Asterisk, I thought inheritance meant what you leave behind. I understand now that it's what you teach someone to carry forward. I'm sorry I learned that too late. Asterisk, if revenge means destruction, then I never sought it. But if revenge means reclaiming your dignity, protecting your legacy, and refusing to let love be mistaken for obligation, then yes, this was sweet, not because my daughter lost something, but because I finally gave myself the respect I had spent a lifetime postponing, and in doing so, I left behind something far richer than money. I left behind truth.